Come to Candlelight Inn, home of the original Chicken George and Jan Sauce. Dine in, carry out, and catering available. Located in Rock Falls and Sterling, Illinois, as well as Clinton, Iowa. Come try our original Chicken George today.
Need a roof, vinyl windows, or doors? Call R.E. Duchesne Construction. With an A-plus rating for the Better Business Bureau and servicing Will, Grundy, and Kendall counties, call R.E. Duchesne. 815-722-2821. Financing available. Find out more online at reduchene.com.
Are going to come right down to the wire. Yeah, he really likes this field. Team of the Week MVP.
I like Reich.
Since 2016, it's been my privilege to represent the people of the 63rd District. I want to continue representing you as an independent voice in Springfield.
I like Reich. We like Reich.
We're here to help you with your problems that result from an automobile accident or an injury on the job or the loss of a loved one. There's no reason you should go through this alone and guess that you're doing things right.
We deal with tragedies that affect families and individuals every day.
Come here and protect your interests. We've been doing this collectively for over 100 years. Let's put that experience to work for you.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back and welcome into Live with Friday Night Drive and the Friday Night Drive podcast. I am Kyle Nabors along with Steve Soucie here. It is Thursday, December 7th. We are live on YouTube and the Friday Night Drive Facebook page. And we are here to talk the IHSA district proposal, which went to the schools this week to vote. They will be voting this week, and next week we'll find out the results of that right before Christmas time. Seuss, this is not the first time we've had this discussion and a vote on the IHSA district proposals. This is the second time we've gone through this. The plan was scrapped the first time around. What are you hearing from schools so far this week?
Well, I think a lot of people, I guess have expressed appreciation for, the project that I put together, early in this week in regards to mocking up the districts, because one important component in this process that is different from last time is not the policy submitter nor the IHSA have any plans to put out what this looks like. So those that wanted to know more about the process, those that wanted to know how it might look for their individual school and football in general, were kind of out in the dark on this. They had to kind of go on their own gut and, trusting that they've interpreted the red proposal the way that they think that they did. So basically, I've got a lot of feedback from a lot of people talking about how, we kind of like the way that this looks, or, we don't like the way that this looks. And I think, in my mind, there's been a majority of people on the side of we don't like the way that this looks. But I've also heard through the grapevine and talking to a lot of people, I think I don't know if it's a silent majority, but there are a lot of people that I have not heard from that I know are for this. So I think ultimately we've got a very interesting vote coming our way over the next 2 weeks.
I'm trying to figure out if I'm insulated being up here in the northwest suburbs where I know the support for the district proposal is a lot lower. And I'm just in an echo chamber. But I am not, like last time, there was a fair amount of public support for the district system when we went through this before. I have not come across that at all so far, Seuss. It's been very overwhelmingly against the district system. As you said, you think there's maybe not a silent majority, but a fair amount of people that are school district that are going to vote for this proposal. Can you kind of walk us through what, or those groups that you think will vote in favor of this? First off,
Well, I think some of it came down to some of the reason that I believe that is I got some feedback from people at the town meetings that were saying, hey, this town meeting completely against. But there were other town meetings. For example, I heard through the grapevine, I believe it was in Pontiac. I could be wrong about the location, that there were 16 representatives at that town meeting. All 16 voted in support of putting this on the proposal on the ballot. So that may not necessarily mean that those schools are going to vote for it in the long run, but they at least thought it had enough merit to be put on the ballot. So that tells me that in certain areas, yes, there are people out there that at least support discussing this and putting it on the ballot to get a better look at it. And that's kind of where it comes down to. I think what it really comes down to is that there are a lot of conferences in the state of Illinois where you go across maybe 2 or 3 classifications. You maybe got a 4A, 5A, 6A conference, a 3A, 4A, 5A conference. And a lot of times, not every time, the relative stacking order of how those conferences usually finish out are kind of heavily tied to the size of the school. You will find those 4A, 5A, 6A conferences where it's usually the 5 and 6A conference teams at the top of the conference and the smaller schools at the bottom. And those schools are frankly not that thrilled about consistently, finding themselves at the bottom of this. So their want is to play schools of similar location, of similar enrollment, and I can understand that. And they want the stability of having it kind of locked in for them, not having to worry about hey, what happens if this team decides to go to 8-man, or what happens if this team decides to go to another conference and then leaves us with an odd number and a weird date in our schedule that we're going to have difficulty filling. In some ways, I think that might be a little bit short-sighted because there's no way that you can guarantee that those kinds of things won't happen to you in the district system.
yeah.
There really isn't. You could get to August, and 2 of your district members could decide that they don't have enough teams to carry on in the varsity, the varsity football system. So then you've got 2 open dates and absolutely no way to fill them. I mean, are you going to break up every other district to fill your holes? No, you're not going to do that. So, I mean, it's that logistically, when we come down to it, and we'll discuss this as we go, I just don't. The rigidness of this proposal is a real problem for a lot of people, not just myself, but the fact that set numbers, set things, no wiggle room, and travel considerations and all these other things. So there are various reasons, and I understand the schools that are staunchly in support of this. But like I've said multiple times in this proceeding, are we fixing problems or are we shifting problems? Like, are the schools that are getting fixed out of this situation? Yeah, sure, they're gonna vote for this, but are those problems gone, or are they simply being shifted to different schools that now have to deal with the same problems that other schools did? And I think there's a lot of shifting and not so much fixing in this proposal.
Yeah, it's a pretty vague proposal. We're going to get into it. We're going to compare it to the last time we went through this compared to this time. We'll look at the mock districts that you can find right now at FridayNightDrive.com that Seuss put together earlier this week. You can find Seuss on X at the Seuss. You can find myself on X at Kyle Nabors, and you can find Friday Night Drive on X at FN Drive. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well. And of course, go to FridayNightDrive.com. All off season long. We got tons of coverage for you guys over there. Seuss, John is joining us live this morning on Facebook, which again, if you guys are live with us on YouTube or Facebook, we really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel, leave us a thumbs up. You can jump in and ask a question or leave a comment. John says, this is a good way to frame it for us here. So he says, we talked about this a little bit, but with teams switching conferences every year and other schools getting shoved into conferences that the competition parity is way off. That said, what's the quick pro con for not doing a district system? How about let's start with the pros quickly.
I mean, the pros is stability. I mean, you have a situation where you have a locked in schedule. You don't have to worry about, having to find a week 4 game, for example, against someone somewhere because your conference has an imbalanced number of teams. And, it sets you up in that sense. And there are schools that have problems with that. And with that, in the way that this system is written, you're at least getting yourself closer to a schedule where you're playing schools of like enrollments. That doesn't necessarily mean it's like competitive level, though. I'll try not to get too much into the cons, but I think that's attractive to some programs to get themselves in a situation where they're no longer the small fish in a big pond. It's more medium-sized fish of all the same size in the same pond. That's an attractive situation for some schools. So I think those are the really base positives of this.
How about the cons?
Well, I think, there are reasons why schools elect not to schedule other programs. Some of them might be completely valid. Some of them might not be. But you lose the autonomy of having the choice in the system. If you get placed in a district with, schools that you've elected to not play for years, you don't have a choice. You have to play those schools. The conference system, for whatever flaws it has, allows you to group yourself with teams of, like-minded philosophies and thoughts. And you might find some pairings that are not great for everybody. But there's no situation, districts or conference situation, where everyone's going to be perfect and happy with the way that this happens. It's just not going to happen. Other cons, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, who are the 7 2A teams closest to me? We'll just make a nice little district out of that. Doesn't work that way. I mean, all hands have to wash other ones. There's some giant travel breakdowns that come out of this system where in the conference system, your farthest opponent might be an hour away. But there are systems in this district where all of your opponents are 2+ hours away. It's a big state.
Particularly in the upper levels where you have only a few of like class 7A and 8A teams in the southern portion of the state. We'll get into that. We will show some of the mock districts that Soucie has put together here in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have a lot of instances. I see this question from Josh Reich. Josh says, in a district system, wouldn't Carbondale have to travel 6 hours for every Friday night away game?
No, they wouldn't. I mean, there are enough teams down in the southern portion of the state where in their classification where they're
4A?
I believe they're 5 in this mock-up.
Okay.
Where they sit in a situation where they have teams within an hour and a half to 2 hours of them. They're actually not the extreme example of this. I think the more extreme examples can be considered in 8A, where you've got Edwardsville, O'Fallon, one of the Belleville schools, where they're coupled with Lockport, Minooka, and the 2 Joliet schools. So let's look at that. You're looking at it right now. I mean,
yeah, I got that up on the screen. If you're listening to the podcast version of this, by the way, I quickly, Seuss, just want to say, make sure you go to FridayNightDrive.com. You can see the maps, just not the district. Seuss actually mapped out each class when he put them in here. You can see those purple dots all the way down there by Edwardsville and Belleville compared to the rest of Class 8A.
Yeah, so in that situation, you got 3 teams down there. You're going to have to, from the north, you're going to have to travel to at least one of those every year, and you're going to have, maybe 1 or 2 of those teams coming back to you every single week. Those teams, that's why the conference system, especially in situations like the Southwestern Conference, simply work better, because it's a grouping of somewhat similar enrollments kind of all together there. And what you get in here is you get the breaking apart of conferences. stretching those lines considerably. It's not so bad in some divisions. You look at it on paper and it's like, okay, those make sense. But there's a lot of situations when you map teams strictly by classification and geography where you get little clusters of maybe 10 teams, and you can't make a 10-team district. You have to make it an 8-team district because that's the way that the system is written. There's no flexibility. And then you get other situations where you were talking about competitive disparity. There's no condition in this particular district proposal for competitive balance. So while the conference system isn't perfect, it tends to start working its way towards, stronger teams here, weaker teams here, and kind of ferreting it out a little bit. Now, there are some outliers and there are some situations where it's not great, but here it's just throw a dart at the board and see what happens. And there are some really, really bad examples of that, in my opinion, in 3, 4, and 5A, where you've got a couple, maybe 2 powerhouses in a district and 6 teams that have struggled to put together almost anything.
Is there a specific one I can throw up here, Seuss, so people can see?
Go to 1A, Kyle.
Go down to 1A? Okay.
All right, and look at District 1. And then over the past, I believe 20 years, somebody came up with this. In District 1, there are 22 state championships amongst the members of District 1. The neighboring district, District 2, has 2 teams that have been okay at the postseason level, Hope Academy and Aurora Christian. And Rockford Lutheran has made a few playoff appearances as like a 5-5 type of team. The remaining teams in District 2, the 5 remaining teams in District 2 won a combined 4 games last season in weak conferences. So those are neighboring districts. So they're right next to one another. You got 22 state championships in one side. You've got 2 teams that have made playoff runs, and then a lot of teams that frankly have really, really struggled for quite a while now. So those are the kinds of things that are really prevalent. There are a couple of examples of this, I believe, in 4A, or it's actually 4A with 5A with there's one district where Nazareth and Wheaton St. Francis are in the same district. The other 6 teams are Chicago Public League squads.
Let's pull that up here so people can see here.
Yeah.
We're looking at which class? 5A?
It's 5A, Kyle.
Here we go.
District 3. I'm sorry. There's 3 teams outside of the public league. St. Francis, Glenbard South, and Nazareth, and then 5 public league schools there. So, and I don't mean to, pile on the public league in this situation, but there's been tons of data produced about how they struggle to compete with non-public non-CPL schools. And, and then you look at District 4, which is right next to it. St. Lawrence, Evergreen Park. Before we start the season, you can chart them into the playoffs. That's every year. That is not a balanced district by any shape of the imagination. So, and then you look at district. Yeah, go ahead.
So I got 2 questions for you for 2 different groups here then. Given this, I have a hard time believing that the Chicago Catholic League, East Suburban Catholic Conference, those 24 teams, and I don't even know how many Chicago Public League teams we have at this point, given what we're seeing on the screen right here, I have a hard time thinking either of those 2 conferences would want to vote for something like this. Now, I before I get into that, I want to quickly say, we'll go back to this. I want to quickly say we didn't set this up. What we're looking at here is only a projection from Seuss, okay? The people that submitted the proposal, and the IHSA, neither side has put together any kind of a proposal of what a district system could look like. So Seuss went ahead and did that. Caveats there. We're assuming here that the IHSA will find a way to get to 512 teams to make a nice, even playing field to where they don't have uneven districts, because that really brings a lot of different things into this. And that's really, we're not going to know that until probably January, February, March. It's going to take a bit of time for the IHSA to figure that out. this is probably the most likely scenario where they find a way to get this up to 512 teams. But that is something to think about here when we're discussing this in this context. Now, Seuss, with that being said, my question about the Chicago Public League and the Chicago Catholic League, is there a reason for them to be on board with this?
Well, I think, they might come to a group conclusion. They might not. If they don't, I would think if maybe you're, for example, if you're a Chicago Catholic League team that has struggled to make the playoffs in the current conglomeration, I can see how this could be potentially appealing to you. Because because this is who I am, I did kind of a look at it and said, okay, let's say the system is in place and we're using the districts that I'm proposing. I genuinely believe that all 24 Chicago Catholic League teams would qualify for the playoffs.
That's what I was wondering about that. I was thinking that.
Like, if you look at it and just, throw out the records from this season, but just say, okay, we're hypothetically replaying the 2023 season in this based on what you know about these teams. I believe that every single one of the Chicago Catholic League teams would qualify for the playoffs.
Traditionally, is it the purple division that struggled the most?
Purple and red are your two typical ones that don't send multiple or any in some cases. So I mean, the red didn't send any this year, but that I could see how that scenario would be attractive to them. But some of the schedules that they would have to maneuver to get there very unattractive. So almost every single one of them has a schedule where I would be like, really? I mean, do we really want to do this? So I would be surprised if Catholic was in support of this.
Yeah. Could you imagine Naz playing Noble Bulls Prep, like ITW Spear? Like, that wouldn't be fun for anyone involved. Absolutely not.
I mean, we talk a lot about, making it more competitive, and there are some scenarios, once again, that would make it more competitive for some of these programs. But there are also some of these that are just so, like, you would have 2 or 3 competitive games in district play as far as at the top of the district all season long. Like, your entire season would be 2 games where you were competitive. And
so you'd also have, that we're talking 8 team districts. So you're talking 7 district games and then 2 games where you'd be free to schedule them yourself. Now, I have in this proposal, is there anything that shows when those weeks would be? Would it be week 1 and week 2?
Yeah, it's week 1 and 2. Okay. Basically what the difference, one of the significant differences in my mind between the first proposal and this proposal is that those weeks 1 and 2 games they would count for something. Once you qualify as a top 4 team out of your district, you'd then be placed in the bracket on your overall record and playoff points. So there's an advantage to playing, better teams in those 1 or 2 week games, especially if you beat them, as it would help you get seated higher in the bracket. If you won both of those games and your opponents had decent playoff points, that would help you up the bracket a little bit. And I think it would encourage teams to say, hey, even if we lose these games, we can still get into the playoffs if we finish in the top 4 in the district. But the fun thing, I guess the argument point that has come out of all of this is it'll stop the chase for 5 wins, which is true. It will stop the chase for 5 wins. But now you're limiting your schedule, and now you have a chase for 4 wins inside of your district. Like, you have to figure out how to win 4 wins in your district, and you have no control over who that district is. So, because now that's ultimately getting in the playoffs. That's all that matters. If you win 4 games in your district, you're in. Okay? All that matters. So now the chase becomes winning 4 in a schedule that you did not create. So what if you end up in a brutal district? I mean, there are examples of that. I think there's one in 7A where 7 of the 8 projected teams in that bracket were playoff teams this year.
Looks like we got, let's see, District 2 has a bunch in there. By the way, any of the, when you look at this here, the teams that are bolded are playoff qualifiers from last year. So that gives you a little idea here. Yeah. Some stacked districts in here.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what it really comes down to, is that there are, I mean, and you're in there. You can't,
I can't wait.
There's nothing.
I can't wait to watch Mount Carmel versus Argo.
You could be a fifth place team in one of these conferences or districts and be a really good football team, and you have no chance of making the playoffs. So, I mean, you could be behind it's the same situation now. I guess you could be in a really strong conference and that could hurt you, but I think there are certain situations where some of these are just really stacked. I'm sorry that I can't remember specifically which one we were talking about here. It's obviously not one of these, but there is one in this projection where there are 7 of them. There's another one where there's just one. So, I mean, that's kind of where we're at. So it just becomes this kind of really choppy situation. And I mean, I look at District 5, for example, on what you have pulled up on that screen right now.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, granted, 3 of those teams didn't make the playoffs this year, but historically they all have.
Yeah,
like
Bolingbrook, Glenbard North, and Hinsdale
all
Central.
All eight of those programs, if you looked over the last 5 years, there's a heck of a lot of playoff bids in there and a lot of playoff wins. Like that's kind of where I'm looking at right here. And, and then, I mean, you can look over, not to mention the travel that we're talking about, but there's a lot of historic playoff teams in District 8 too. So not only that to travel all over the place, they got to play a bunch of good football teams. So, I mean, it's just, like I said, there's no contention for this. Like there's no system to kind of balance this. And to be honest with you, 8A is one of, other than the really bad travel thing, that is one that I actually think isn't that bad. Yeah. Like in regards to kind of balancing it a little bit. Obviously heavy in District 5, a little heavy in District 8, but yeah. So, but you'll see that all through this is that you'll have some that are heavy, some that are light, and there's no consideration for how to try to balance that.
Let's see. Zachary Shimon checking in this morning, a regular on Live with Friday Night Drive. He says, do you see a situation where the IHSA could allow schools to vote on who would be in their district, Seuss?
Nope. I don't see any scenario where that would be something that they would put out for consideration, because that would become
a disaster.
The nicest word I can use to describe it would be a hellscape. Like it would just be, because one of the things that I think is interesting about the underlying situations here is, and I'm not going to get into this debate right now because we could go for another 2 hours, but another thing that has come up heavily in this offseason and always does is the private versus public debate. And now, if you are a school that doesn't really want to deal with playing privates, too bad, essentially. Yeah. Not only do you have to deal with them in the playoffs, and you're going to have to deal with them in the playoffs because they're going to be even more prevalent in this system. Now you got to deal with them in the regular season too. And they're determining whether or not you even get into the playoffs. So like that, for me, if I'm somebody who's on, that is on that one side of the fence or the other, this is not going to help you in the private versus public situation if you go to districts. It just simply isn't. You might get lucky and you might be not placed in a district with them, but you might get placed in a district with several of them. It's almost kind of the luck of the draw.
Do we have any idea how often the districts would be examined and reconfigured?
Well, I believe this is how I interpret it. I could be way off on this, but they still plan to use the IHSA's 2-year enrollment periods to calculate this. So if the district proposal went into play, we would have 1 year before the enrollment numbers would switch, because next year is the second year of the enrollment period. So after next year, you get new multipliers factored in, you'd get new success formulas factored in, the new enrollment numbers would come in, for everybody. So schools would go up and down. Co-op arrangements would possibly change. I've already heard about one school that's considering dropping their co-op, which would change their enrollment number. And that's something that a lot of people aren't talking about. Any adjustments to enrollments for anyone can heavily alter this.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you have one school that drops a co-op and goes from being in 3A to 2A, you have to find a way to ferret that team into 2A, and then take out a team from 3A and move them, or take out a team from 2A to move them back up. And that may cause every single one of the drawn districts to change, because you might have to move this team into District 2 and this team into District 4 to make up for it. And everything could be changing. So that's why I think, and the IHSA is taking a lot of heat for this, but that's why they're not producing a mock on this, because there are far too many variables that they just don't know right now. So that for them to put out something like similar to what I did, and I'll readily admit, this may only be 75% accurate in the long run, but I felt like 75% accuracy was better than blind faith.
Yeah.
So that was kind of why I undertook this project, was because natural curiosity was the heaviest factor in this. But I felt like we needed to have something to kind of eyeball it and say, hey, because how I got to 512 could be completely wrong.
And let's quickly, how did you get to 512?
Well, moving into it, you have to start with the fact that with all things considered, we have 500 teams available to put into this that were playoff eligible last year. So you need 12 more. All right. So there are 24 teams in the Chicago Public League that are currently not playoff eligible. So those are in 4 divisions of 6 teams each. So basically what I did is I looked at last year's records and took the top 3 teams from each of those 4 divisions to give me 12 teams and put them into the draw. That's what I did. So I could be wrong about that. And it's very important to note the 12 teams that I put in, the enrollment numbers that they currently carry. Because if they're a different 12 teams or a different, I got 8 of them right and 4 of them wrong, well, what enrollment numbers are those guys at? It might be 2 of the teams that I put in that are not in are 4A teams, and the 2 teams that are coming in instead are 2A teams. So then that pushes teams up, it pushes teams down, it changes all the districts around. Literally, I talk a lot during our current playoff system how one team in 1A can affect teams in 8A. Well, I mean, this is a really classic scenario of that, how one team can just have a cascading effect on like 50 or 60 different things. If you just consider that fact, you have one enrollment change that switches classes all over the place.
Let's see here. Going back to kind of the co-op and 8-man talk, because this will play heavily into this as well. Adam Anderson, another regular here on Live with Friday Night Drive and the Friday Night Drive podcast, says, what about schools dropping co-ops to have smaller enrollments or exploring 8-man? I've heard this a bit down in central southern Illinois, and wonder if it's been going around up there.
Now, to my understanding, while there's nothing that the IHSA can do about a team deciding to move from 11 to 8-man football. So that's a variable that they cannot control. To my understanding, when you sign a co-op arrangement in the current system, you're saying, I'm going to do this for 2 years. That's what my comprehension of that rule. So I don't think teams in current co-op arrangements can drop out of them this year for this system. I could be wrong about that, but that's my interpretation of the situation. But yes, I have heard, I want to say 3 to 5 programs that are considering either altering or dropping their co-op altogether in a way to, for whatever reason. But I think one of the factors for doing that is to try to get their enrollment number as small as possible.
What benefit is there to doing that?
I mean, there are co-op programs right now that I could look at the list and tell you if they drop their co-op that they may or may not be getting a lot of benefit from. They would go from being a 3A program to a 1A or a 2A program, a 2A program to a 1A program. Because all this system as currently drawn is who are the 64 smallest? That is who goes into 1A. So if you can get yourself down into one of those numbers, then you can get yourself into 1A. And the other ripple to that is, and I was talking to someone about this before, is by drawing them in clean 64 lines, if you start before the season starts and just look at, okay, we're going to go for the smallest school, look at them, and then just go down the list. Usually you'll have to go about 80 deep to get 32 playoff teams on that list. So think about that for a minute. And that number decreases as you go down. So now the pool for a 1A playoff bracket used to include 80 teams.
Okay.
Now it includes 64. So there's going to be more opportunity in the district system for a program that maybe has struggled to get one of those spots, because now they're only competing against the 64 smallest. So the bids have to go to 32 of those 64 teams. That's the way this system works. So, there's going to be 8 to 10 teams that usually are not in this playoff discussion in 1A that now are going to have a much richer opportunity to reach the playoffs just because of the way the math works. Conversely, it starts to go the other way when you get up to 6 and 7, and even into 8, because the numbers have to come from somewhere. If you created 7 bids for teams in 1A, where'd those 7 bids go? Well, they start getting pushed out of the larger classifications. So you could have 36 or 37 schools in 5 or 6A that are usual playoff teams. Well, there's only 32 spots. So the course correction there has to come from somewhere. And by doing it with this math, it comes in 5 and 6A.
All right, so we got to get out of here soon. We've hit every question and comment in the chat that we have so far. If you guys have anything else you want us to discuss, so go ahead and throw that in the next couple minutes. Zeus, how would the multiplier and success formula play into the district system?
I mean, the one thing about this that I think is attractive to the people that support it is you go into the season and you know what classification you are. So if you are choosing to play up to 6A, that's simply guaranteeing, like it is now, that you're in 6A. But everyone else knows that you're also going to be in 6A, and you know that you're going to be in 6A. So I think what it might ultimately lead to is some interesting machinations between teams that are saying, hey, I might just play up. I mean,
you'll have to decide a lot earlier if you're going to play up, though, right? Because right now, we've had teams in August be like, we're going to play up in 6A or 7A.
Right. I mean, it will have to be declared much earlier in the calendar, because as I understand it, and at least the way that the proposal is written, and I don't know what this number is, that we would probably have districts, if this passes, probably in March. And then with all the machinations that have to go through it, teams that are playing, the reason that we would have them and they would be kind of locked in stone is we already know who's playing up next year. And we can't change that, because when you play up in a 2-year period, you are saying, hey, 2-year period. So Rita, East St. Louis, whether we're in a district system or not, St. Rita's a 7A school, East St. Louis is a 6A school. That's already declared. Sacred Heart Griffin is the only one facing the success formula. They're a 5A school. So none of that stuff changes, because that's all based on the 2-year period. So there will be no changes with that. The only way that those things would change would be if we voted this in and we're still using it in the 2025 season. Then you would get the new multipliers, the new applications for teams choosing to play up, the new co-op arrangements, the new whatever. All those new numbers would be implemented for 25. Nothing in the enrollment sheet would change for 24. Nothing.
Do you think that's a mistake not to just say, oh, if we're going to go to a new system, let's just get everything on the same page now? Or is it better to maybe have a 1 year where it's like, all right, let's reset it when we normally would. We'll just see how this plays out this year. You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do. And I kind of think that this actually is the right way to go with this, because then you're not throwing open the doors and creating even more variables. Like I said, if you put something out and say, okay, hey, now you still have the option to make changes here, then that creates a whole nother layer of problems that you have to calculate your way through. Maybe you get two more teams that say, hey, I want to play. I don't like the way this looks. I'm going to play up and take my chances. Like, I don't like the feel of that, because I think it might be utilized. Someone might say, hey, I don't like this district. I'll just take, since it's only for 1 year, I'll just say I'll play up to 6A, see what the dice roll says. Like, that's that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It wouldn't be for 1 year. I'm just wondering if it just makes more sense to just start a new 2-year enrollment period now if you're going to go to a different. Although I guess you can't, because you have to have it. Do you have to have it match up for every sport across the IHSA?
Yeah, you can't. Like I said, there'd be no way that we could go and say, okay, refigure multipliers, do all this. Like that isn't part of this proposal.
Right.
Like, you would have to
be a separate proposal.
You'd have to make an amendment saying we want to get rid of 2-year enrollment. We want to go back to 1. And that would have to be for everybody. So I don't think there would be any way that they could do that. I think that the interesting situation would be, like, I strongly believe that if this gets passed, then next year's legislative ballot will have a proposal on it to go back to the current system. I believe that. I think, and
probably.
And if it doesn't pass, I think we'll have some sort of modified district proposal in next year's legislative program. That's what I believe. I think this is something that we're going to conversate on, and unless it just gets stomped in the vote, and then maybe it goes away. But I don't think that's going to happen. So, I mean, but I think this is a conversation that isn't going away. It just is not going away. I mean, I really think that all parties need to get into a room on this and start hashing out a more fleshed out potential solution to this.
I agree. Like, I'm not against the district system. I just want, like, if you're going to do it, you need to have a lot more succinct proposal. Like, there's just so many variables that we don't know that you're asking schools to vote on.
Because I have one that's been kicking around in my head for a while. Now, I can't submit a proposal, but the one that I've been kicking around in my head, I like a lot better than the one that's out there right now. Obviously, I created it, so of course I do. But I've shown it to a few people, and people like it. But I can't submit it. Like, and I know I'm showing it to people that I think are probably of like mind. But I just think there's just so many holes in this proposal, and I'm really, really uncomfortable with putting something in there that just has so many variables out there that are not that I have anything against them, but they're just leaving an awful lot to the IHSA's discretion here. And I know they're not sitting there, rubbing their fingers together like villains and going, oh boy, look at what we get to do. This is largely shoved into a computer and said, spit it out for me. And that's part of my problem too. Like what the computer comes out with, they're not going to argue with, they're not going to analyze. They're just going to say, this is what we put the factors into the computer. This is what the map spit out. This is what we got.
Which is really, I don't know if there's another way to do it though, because then you start bringing in like human bias. Like, do you want people at the IHSA to manually change what the computer spits out? Because how is that any different than a conference system? If you start, well, like this team isn't going to be competitive in this district, or like,
when I drew the districts, I intentionally, but the problem with this is I know where everything is, but I intentionally took the labels off because I didn't want any sort of bias in my mind saying, hey, I don't want to put those guys in that district because that'll make it too strong. But I know where everything is. So I have an unconscious bias to be like, okay, I don't want to put them there. And I didn't try to do that. But what you would need in that situation is to bring someone who has no idea who any of these schools are, put the 64 dots on the map and say, divide them into groups of 8. Like, that would be and I guess that's what the computer is doing because it doesn't have any biases. But I've seen some of squirrely decisions that computer has made in the past too. You want to talk to somebody, you want to talk to somebody about like how basketball sectionals are put together sometimes. Talk to those people, and they will put up that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia conspiracy theory to shame. Like just pointing around and tinfoil hat and it's computer isn't perfect either.
We launched Friday Night Drive back in 2019, and one of the first stories we posted was I had went down with to the IHSA and done a mapping exercise with them, and they actually showed me the old way they used to do it with the rubber bands, as I have one in my hand. Like they literally put pins on the board and rubber band teams in with the sectionals where they were going and stuff. It's a wild way they used to do things before the computer system.
They used to do the football playoffs that way too. I actually went and watched it one time, a really long time ago, and I mean, it was fascinating to watch, but I was like, as I'm watching, I'm like, this makes no sense. There has to be a better way to do this. I mean, granted, this was in like 1994 or something, but I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But yeah, so it's like I said, there's really no clean way to do it. Like I said, the computer probably is the fairest solution. I'm just saying that the computer sometimes spits out some oddities too.
All right, so we got to get out of here. I'm going to throw it back to you one more time, though. We got this voting process goes through the end of next week, correct?
It does go through the end of next week. We should have, I believe the voting closes on the 18th, and I've been told that the results will be released on the 19th. So a quick condition on that, though, like I said, if this goes through, don't expect all of a sudden you're just going to get a resolution on this. I mean, I've talked to multiple people that have told me it's going to take a while, and it should, because there are a lot of variables that are written into this right now that we don't know the answers to, and we're not going to get them overnight. So I honestly think the earliest that we would see the actual districts
March
and see mock-ups of team schedules would be March if this passes. Yeah. That's what I really believe. It's part of the reason right now why I haven't even started the process of trying to put together what would be a normal 2024 schedule file. And to be honest with you,
I was gonna ask you that. Usually you've already got schedules typed in for about a quarter of the teams.
I haven't even started that yet. I would say usually I'd be at 25 or 30% and annoying people to give me more because I want answers. But I haven't even started that process. I have not even opened up the spreadsheet file because while I'm not an enemy of pointless work. I'm just like, well, if this passes, this is going to render this whole
just
exercise
light it on fire,
completely moot, and it does take me a very long time to do. So I'm just like, I'm not going to start this until I know that it's actually for a purpose. So like I said, I don't know how this is going to go. I think it's going to be a close vote. It's an interesting topic. I can climb down a wormhole and talk about it for hours, but I know that we're not going to do that. So, but it's layered, and I get the people that support it. I just think that there are just too many variables in this thing to especially have it go into play for 2024. It just seems like we're really pushing something really hard into a very small window that needs a lot more discussion and clarity before we should move forward with it.
All right. Well, make sure you stick to FridayNightDrive.com over the next 10 days or so. We're going to have a lot of coverage of this vote. And one more time, make sure you subscribe to Shaw Local's YouTube page. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, thumbs up, leave a comment. We really appreciate it. It helps other people find the show. For now, though, we're going to go ahead and sign off. For Steve Soucie, I am Kyle Nabors. Thank you, everyone who joined us live this morning. We really appreciate it. We'll talk to you guys later.
Come to Candlelight Inn, home of the original Chicken George and Jan Sauce. Dine in, carry out, and catering available. Located in Rock Falls and Sterling, Illinois, as well as Clinton, Iowa. Come try our original Chicken George today.
Need a roof, vinyl windows, or doors? Call R.E. Duchesne Construction. With an A+ rating for the Better Business Bureau and servicing Will, Grundy, and Kendall counties, call R.E. Duchesne. 815-722-2821. Financing available. Find out more online at reduchene.com.
Are going to come right down to the wire.
Yeah, he really likes this
I like Reich.
Since 2016, it's been my privilege to represent the people of the 63rd District. I want to continue representing you as an independent voice in Springfield.
I like Reich.
We like Reich.
We're here to help you with your problems that result from an automobile accident or an injury on the job or the loss of a loved one. There's no reason you should go through this alone and guess that you're doing things right.
We deal with tragedies that affect families and individuals every day.
Come here and protect your interest. We've been doing this collectively for over 100 years. Let's put that experience to work for you.